Welcome to Reinventing Capitalism, a space where tech, social entrepreneurship, and impact meet to create the businesses that will lead to a sustainable future. I'm your host, Claudia Thomas. Today, I'm interviewing Paige, founder of OceanLedger. Her passion for diving led her to study biology, which led her to founding her new company. OceanLedger leverages data to provide insights for decision making about coastal ecosystems. First, she shares her journey as she came up to the realization that she wanted to bridge the gap between helping conserve the ocean and working for the private sector, touching directly into the motto of reinventing capitalism. She then explains how OceanLedger works, how they use machine learning and AI to build algorithm prediction, who are their clients, and which is their business model. Finally, Paige explains how coastal risk should be integrated into decision-making processes of businesses, and she gives real-life examples for us all to understand. Join me to learn about a very interesting, but at the same time complex topic that we don't normally have the opportunity to hear about. If you care about the ocean, this conversation is for you. Thank you for listening. Paige, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very intrigued by the topic that we're going to discuss because the ocean, it's a huge part of our lives, but it is often overlooked. So, can you tell us what's the role of the ocean and how did you fall in love with it?
Yeah, of course. Wow, what is the role of the ocean? That is a loaded question. I mean, you can look at it from, different levels, right? You can look at it from an atmospheric perspective, the services it provides in terms of oxygen and all these things, supporting global fishing stocks and tourism and all of these kind of factors. But the way that I look at it is really how it protects and supports industries and livelihoods, right? So you can look at sort of natural capital accounting as a theoretical framework, which allows us to kind of separate the value of these ecosystems, the physical, the biological. And I guess the real issue that we're concerned with the ocean today, right, is, we know there's a theoretical link between business and livelihoods and how the ocean is functioning and as a result, degrading in many parts of the world. But there's no way to actually measure and quantify this link. And then on top of that, to make it relevant to whoever it is that owns or operates or lives within that particular part of the coastline. The ocean is obviously huge. And the issue, the part of the ocean that we deal with, specifically the shoreline, is extremely dynamic. Dynamic both in the sense that you have a whole other water atmosphere to deal with, but also just in terms of how that shoreline changes and interacts. So it's a really difficult thing to measure. And from my perspective, the reason why I became so entranced with the ocean pretty much started, at the age of 10. I started diving then. I also grew up sailing competitively. I got my dive master by the time I was 18 and pretty much took any opportunity to be on or underwater. So by the time I was 18, I had like 250 dives. I'd done field research in the Bahamas and Fiji and Indonesia. And as you can imagine, like anyone who's exposed at such a young age to the natural environment, whether it's like your backyard or for me diving, you just become extremely empathetic. And when you pair empathy with curiosity, that becomes a really strong driving force. And that's what led me to study biology and evolution. It's what made me obsessively curious about how even at the cellular level, marine organisms have evolved over time to adapt to changing environments. And in the ocean's case, that's temperature and ocean acidification. So, I was always sort of drawn at looking at how marine conservation could actually be not just an NGO or nonprofit kind of initiative, but something that could be embedded in the operations or risk management of industries.
You must have seen so many things that the majority of us have not by diving so much and like being so close to the ocean. So how does the company come about? You have all these years of, like spending time close to the ocean, you study biology. How do you come up with the idea?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a funny story. So I knew that after university I wanted to do something in marine conservation, but at the time the two routes were academia or going to work for an NGO, and neither of those seemed super appealing to me. And so, and I guess also I have a little bit of a diehard capitalist background. So I kind of decided, okay, I'm going to do something completely different to broaden my perspective. So I sold my soul to the corporate world after university. I worked in investment banking and strategy consulting. But I got restless, right, with kind of the job that I was in, and I thought, oh, impact investing could be kind of a good way to bridge, you know, the sustainability, the impact, and the financial world, right? But you actually look at impact in investing, it actually has nothing to do often with sustainability. So I started kind of as any normal person would, looking into like the financing flows, like where was the money actually going to for anything related to marine conservation. And at that time, this was like a couple of years, a year and a half ago, lots of banks actually came out with reports on the blue economy, like Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, and they all said the same thing. They were like, it's massive and it's such a big deal, and we're all gonna die if we don't protect our oceans, including banks. But we have a lack of standardized monitoring, no baselines, no way to create the confidence that we need for any meaningful financial investments, not even carbon credits. So I guess I kind of, after, you know, reading all of that and looking into it, I kind of called like BS. I was convinced that there had to be something out there. So I started digging into academic papers, and that's when I came across my co-founder's research. So he was looking into, you know, for 8 years, this very specific problem or opportunity, right? Which is, how do we leverage Earth observation for coastal ecosystems? And from what I could gather from literally just reading his paper, I was like, this has legs to solve some, right? Not all, certainly, but some of the technological issues that are being raised by the private as well as the public sector. So I guess what OceanLedger does in a nutshell, right? The technology that we spun out is we provide coastal, you know, insights on risk and ways to target meaningful methods to mitigate and adapt to that risk with either nature-based solutions like active restoration or regenerative aquaculture. So what we do as a starting point is we essentially fuse, you know, ground information, site level information from ecosystems or water quality with satellite imagery in order to paint a picture of marine ecosystems, both physically, like their extent, but also how they're biologically functioning. And this picture is what you would call like a spatial baseline. So it's where we quantify that extent, right? Those indicators for condition, and quantify ecosystem services like carbon or ecosystem patchiness. Once we have that baseline or that picture, what we can do with satellite imagery is pretty much act like a time machine. So we can look historically multiple decades in the past, and you know, it becomes all of a sudden a story, right? A story that can help, you know, those who are building, operating on the ground, doing conservation work, understand what might happen in the future, the trajectory of those ecosystems, the trajectory of that shoreline, and then how this ultimately impacts, right, the work they're doing, how they can forecast then scenarios that help them better understand, what if I built here versus there? What if I put a seawall there? What if I restored that ecosystem? All of a sudden, you've created a tool which is, you know, in theory, globally applicable, but locally relevant to your context and to your site, and of course, to the ecosystems and the trends that are happening in that area.
You've said so much. I have so many follow-up questions to this explanation. First of
Sorry,
all, no,
a
no.
lot.
First of all, I would like to say that I loved how you started your explanation, but saying that you are a capitalist at heart, because this is the reason why we're here. It's the idea of bridging the gap between private capital and solving real world problems like nature in this case. So, okay, Ocean Ledger. You've explained how it works. How do you, what I'm most curious about is, how do you gather all these data, and how do you compare the historical, I guess, movements of nature with what can happen in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how do we gather the data? That it really depends, but if you're talking about the field level, site level information that we use to do our algorithm, to train our algorithms on, that can either be from, existing data sets. There could be, state level data sets, existing information essentially that's out there that we can leverage. And by the way, there is a lot of siloed information out there that just
Okay.
is not being connected in the right way. Or if it's needed, depending on the analysis and the client, we can guide that field data collection. So if it's a conservation project, if it's an environmental impact assessment, normally that would be the case where we would guide or integrate like specific site level data that was collected. On the Earth observation side, and in both cases, by the way, we like to consider ourselves like data agnostic. So as much as possible, we try and advise in the future, right? Like what is the right type of data to be collecting so that it's usable for solutions like ours. But at the end of the day, we're like flexible on what, format that data comes in. On the satellite imagery side, we use whatever imagery archive or tasked information that's going to be relevant for that client output. So public or commercial.
Okay.
Commercial is great, it's higher resolution, comes with it's a lot of challenges in terms of processing it. Public is unbelievable. And if you look at the growth of the Earth observation industry and the number of satellites that are going to be launched in the next 10 years, it is an industry which is combined with AI going to have a lot more investment, I think, in the future. But dirty little secret Earth observation industry actually aggregating and processing that information for downstream insights, like what we're doing, is extremely complex. And so that's something that we fold into the value that we provide to customers.
Okay. So all the data, it's mainly gathered via satellites, or there's like other sensors underwater or anything that can give you how the biodiversity changes underwater as well.
So yeah, so to clarify, that site level field data can be anything from, like labels on a map from a previous consulting report, or it could be from a buoy, right? So like if NOAA had a buoy that was collecting information on temperature, it could be lots of companies we partner with that have underwater drones, right? That are collecting really high resolution, detailed information on things like condition or anything like eDNA. We can integrate pretty much any of that in order to train our algorithms, and to provide that spatial and then temporal information on the ecosystems. So it really depends, one, what is needed for the analysis, what's being asked, and two, what is already available that we can use. If not, then we'll work with people on the ground, other companies, whatever is needed to get to the level of accuracy that we want to get to.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Well, I was trying to understand like the meaning of natural capital accounting because it's a bit abstract.
Yeah.
Like I actually understood it by thinking that GDP, for example, tells you the state of the economy, but that doesn't take into consideration the state of nature. So in my
Yeah.
mind, natural capital accounting gives you a way to take into account nature into your business operations. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I sort of like understood it in my mind. So if that's correct, how do you price a natural asset in order to like help you decide what to do or what not to do?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, natural capital accounting. I actually use that term less and less because it is a very theoretical thing. It really depends on your level of knowledge in terms of how confident you feel you've been explaining it. But I think you described it really,
Good.
really well. The research that my co-founder did, just quick background, was entirely based on the UNCA framework, right? The System for Environmental Economic Accounting, which is theoretical, right? And says that you essentially are, breaking ecosystems down into physical accounts, right? And then into monetary accounts. And then, like you said, connecting sort of what is the business costs associated with a natural asset. The way that we think about it, because I think there are huge rabbit holes you can go down, in terms of making it really complex. Like the most complex end of the spectrum, which is absolutely where we want to go to in the future, is actually being able to quantify, say, for a particular hotel, right? Or maybe for like a fishing, industry or something, what is the loss or the benefit of restoring X coral reef, right? What does that mean in terms of the revenue? I would say probably not just revenue generated, but the potential revenue loss you could have by not having that reef there in the next 10, 15 years. That's
Yeah.
all possible to do. It's been done by one-off research studies before. It is complicated. So we start simpler. How we think about it is kind of a mix between physical and nature risk, I guess. So what our models actually incorporate when we look at things like shoreline erosion. So how we think about it, it's property and business disruption for any businesses along that coastal environment. So that could be a port, that could be an airport. Actually, a lot are built on shorelines. It could be hotels, right? But what we're looking at, we're modeling is shoreline movements, incorporating underwater topography and the protection service of ecosystems. So does it make a difference to have mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs along that coastline when we think about the protection that asset has against storms or sea level rise? So that's what we start with because it's already something people are concerned with. It's related to flood risk, it's related to climate, change scenarios. But what we're doing is actually just providing another risk factor, geomorphic environmental changes, which incorporate the value of ecosystems and packaging it that way. So we sell that to people who are building, right, new projects along those coastlines, when they have to do impact assessments, when they have to look at erosion and these kinds of things. But the longer term strategy is ultimately to integrate this into risk management and insurance, right?
Okay.
Because those are the mechanisms that will have the power and create the natural incentives for people, private sector, to think about how they actively avoid risks from coastal ecosystem degradation or erosion.
Yeah.
That would be something that a government would worry about. But clearly, it's not enough for just the government to be taking care of that. So for us, insurance is kind of one of those mechanisms that potentially can provide the right incentives, pricing to do that kind of nature risk assessment.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. So who would you sell this data/risk assessment to? Who are
Yeah,
your
so
clients?
Yeah, so at the moment, we've worked mainly with conservation groups on kind of a project-based, just, giving out our analytics through email. Nothing fancy from a product perspective, but the business model, of course, lends itself to, it's sort of like an annual license, right? Where we provide our software and the service being we're doing everything pretty much from data aggregation through to the modeling. So we would have separate, in the end, it's the same core technology, right, in terms of the analytics, but we would have separate products, one for marine engineering or construction for site level analytics, and then for insurance, whether it's on the reinsurance side, looking at risk analytics or actual underwriting activity, we'd have a separate pricing and business model for that, which would be more on kind of an annual basis. So those are the two segments that we're looking at the most. But it makes sense from a risk and also monitoring perspective, having it be annual. Of course, we will still work with municipalities or conservation groups. Absolutely. They don't require a really fancy product, frankly. So that's always going to be something that we do from an impact perspective as a company. That's really important. But from a product development and future business model perspective, insurance and marine engineering, think of it as there are two levels in the same area, right? One is site level. So what we do is this information helps them when they have new projects. So the project design phase for building assets along a coastline, where we provide the analysis that helps them understand where to build this, set a baseline for environmental impact, active restoration conservation within that particular area. Insurance, it's looking at, for underwriting, it would be having that risk factor, right? The geomorphic gradual changes within that environment and having that influencing the pricing as well as the coverage for those assets.
Yeah. Which data do you track to measure your impact?
So we started with the KPIs that are closest to our product, because that's kind of probably the best thing that we can control at the moment. So we look at things in terms of our output, like the accuracy, the spatial uncertainties of our model, and ultimately how that feeds into the transparency and the robust decision making of our clients. So that's kind of fundamentally what we've started with. Of course, we can also quantify, the ecosystems that we've mapped and the amount that we've targeted or helped target for restoration and conservation. But that's going to be a metric that certainly needs to be refined and monitored over time. We're focused, I think, at this stage on much more direct KPIs, which, as I said, lend us to being very transparent about our methods, about the data, and ultimately about the robustness that then feeds down to the client activities.
So, Paige, you're currently at a very early stage of your company. What uncertainty about your company are you maybe uncomfortable with today? Like one of those moments that you have no idea what will happen in the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, we're early because the market is also, I mean, some would argue, right, it's like too early for this kind of thing. I don't think that's the case. I think there are a lot of industries which are massively on the cusp of adopting deep analytics, more robust analytics than sort of the first wave of climate risk analytics. But listen, as a result, right, we're trying to straddle two complicated worlds, right? Where, sure, you can have more certainty today with land-based initiatives, right, in terms of like driving returns with credits. But at the end of the day, right, the uncertainty for the coastal space is that private sector contribution it's small today, right? And the technical solution that we provide can address everything that needs to be addressed. So I think we have no uncertainty in terms of the niche value that we can provide and focusing on that niche and being super dedicated. So I have no uncertainty about my team or our product, but it certainly is going to, in an exciting way, be an uncertain future in terms of understanding within coastal what really is going to rise above to be a more reliable, financial mechanism. Like people have been saying carbon credits for a while. I don't think that's the case. If it would be biodiversity credits. If it's not biodiversity credits, in our opinion, right, it's insurance. So I think that's the uncertainty that we're living with, but that's also the reason why you do a startup, right?
Yeah.
Is the reason you move into this kind of space, right? Is to have a role in helping define, what that certainty might be in the future.
For sure. You're not waiting for the future to happen. You are making it happen based on your vision of it. So that I can fully understand and I guess like close the loop of OceanLedger. Do you have an example of how OceanLedger has helped or influenced making a real world decision or policy?
Yeah, we've done a few projects where, the first customers, right, that signed up were people who were doing conservation work, because we think about it, we extract what they're already doing on the ground and the knowledge that they have, and extract meaning, turn that into something spatial, dynamic, something they can use for, for funding and ultimately to target, conservation activities. So we did a project in Mallorca, which is a seagrass restoration project. And yeah, there we did, a baseline, and we looked historically, and we looked at sort of the trends of the seagrass species there to understand and create kind of this restoration suitability index, right? Which is kind of a general approach which we could locally adapt, right? Based on the life cycle rates of the species there. And again, that historical information. So that was quite cool because, again, the people who are working on the ground there have a pretty good idea of what might be a good place to restore. But this actually sort of was guiding areas based on previous degradation from anchoring that influenced, actually, maybe that area over there, which we're pretty convinced would be a good spot, might actually not be the best spot because it's already been on sort of this decline of degradation, and you wouldn't have the highest chance of restoration success. And for coastal seagrass, those costs for restoration are so high. It's a reason why carbon credit projects, a lot of other projects out there, are super small scale and really difficult to scale. So while there were a lot of great next steps and improvements that came out of that project, that's the whole point, right? Like that's taking what we do and what they do, making it very complementary, and then scaling that to other projects and to incentivize bigger projects. So I think, it was a great step. I'm not going to say, we just saved the world, but it's a great step forward, right?
For sure.
Thinking like-minded organizations that want to have a bigger impact.
For sure. If you could collaborate with anyone, like say a company, organization, government, individual, who would it be and why?
That's a tough one. I think of like a recent one, I guess, because I think about this all the time. I want to work with so many people and so many organizations. But one that definitely springs to mind because they were in Singapore recently is Coast for Seas. So I first came across them 3 years ago when I was at a blue food conference in London. And what they do is in a nutshell, they help local communities throughout Southeast Asia scale up regenerative seaweed farming. So they do a number of different things related to that, but it's very capacity building focused. And I think they've created an unbelievably impactful and scalable model. And yeah, it's not one of our target customers, but from a conservation point of view, that type of on the ground capacity building frameworks is the perfect kind of solution to pair with, the type of technology we're doing, right? Where we can sort of think about how to scale the components of that framework related to, identifying suitable areas for seaweed farming or monitoring the impact of that type of aquaculture. And I think they're incredible organizations. So they're definitely someone that we'd probably want to at least learn from in the first instance, and keep an eye on. And I think they won or were nominated for Earthshot Prize. So I'm definitely not the only person with this opinion.
Thank you for this, Paige. I have one last question for you. Let's imagine you're looking into a crystal ball that shows you the future. As an expert in the space, what do you wish to see in the world of nature, natural capital accounting, coastal in the next 5 to 10 years?
Wow, what would I want to see? I'm biased, right? Because this is related to our company, but I really, really want to see the insurance companies that are on the cusp of realizing that this is not just a big opportunity, but such a massive risk. In the next 5 years, I want those organizations that are on the cusp to actually be, making real strides in the space. And what that starts with is understanding the in-house models that you have or whatever you've been using today is just not going to cut it. It's not going to be good enough. And the same goes, right, for any organization that's building or operating along a coastline, right? At the end of the day, whether you like it or not, doing an environmental impact assessment, tick box approach is not going to cut it. So I'd really like for the calls that I have to go from me not just purely educating while selling at the same time, but actually have it end up being me selling more than just educating.
Yeah.
I think that, it'll always be part of the job. It'll always be the most important thing to do. But I think really there's a transition that's happening where you're going to see a lot more organizations that fundamentally get what you're saying rather than having to be convinced of it in the first place. Because what we're doing is not trying to do green premium or, a nice to have, right? It is directly related to the operations and the assets that they have today.
Yeah, I love asking this question because you not only give a glimpse into the future, but also normally the answers are like come from a perspective with a lot of optimism. And there's a lot of consumer shifts that are coming, but also a lot of opportunities from these consumer shifts and also industry shifts. So I hope the listeners also see it this way and can see all the opportunities that come from these behavioral changes and changes in the world, I guess.
Totally.
Thank you, Paige. This was awesome. Definitely a lot of insights into an industry and a world that I don't normally have the opportunity to get into. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for your time, Claudia.